Treatment of anti-whaling protesters raises human rights questions. Our food prices are astonishingly high. Off-roading still illegal, and more on this episode of the Reykjavik News Desk. First up on the Reykjavik News Desk, as I reported last Monday, two protesters, Anahita Sahar Babae and Elisa Bijou, engaged in direct action and civil disobedience by climbing the masts of two whaling ships and refusing to come back down with the aim of preventing them from leaving the harbor to hunt whales. What followed were some questionable actions by the Icelandic police that some lawyers think may have violated human rights laws. But even if that is the case, it's unlikely the police will face any consequences, which I'll get to later. Now, within hours of this operation beginning, police cordoned off the area and prevented spectators and supporters alike from getting too close, although there was an area for media to be able to get a little closer. In so doing, one camera person was able to capture the moment when police seized backpacks from these protesters that contained food and water, and one case reportedly medication as well, amongst other things. Furthermore, the police denied medical staff access to the protesters to be able to check up on them. I mean, the lack of food and water was, of course, one concern, but so was hypothermia, because the police had also seized warm clothes and sleeping bags from the protesters as well. So, can they do that? Well, that's the big question. As one human rights lawyer pointed out, the police can only legally seize your property if they believe it contains evidence of a crime. More importantly, police are supposed to protect the public good. And just because someone is accused of a crime, in the case of the two protesters trespassing, does not mean that they should be denied access to food, water, and medical attention. Well, the police justified their actions with pretty simple reasoning, that being that if the protesters simply came down from the masts, then they could have food and water. What's interesting about that is the story of this man, Benedict Erlingsson. He and two others in 1987 chained themselves to a couple of whaling ships for the exact same reason, to prevent them from going to sea and hunting whales. And when he was asked how the police treated them, he said that he was allowed to have a doctor come visit him and check up on him. So you mean to tell me that the police treated this Icelandic man with more respect and deference than they did two foreign women? Interesting. I wonder why that might be. Speaking of which, the police also used force in arresting another foreign woman who had strayed a little bit too far into the cordoned area as she was trying to shout a message to the protesters. Shouting a message because, you guessed it, the police had also seized the protesters' phones. And she was visibly bruised during her arrest. Now, by Tuesday morning, the protesters came down from the mast, which is frankly amazing because at that point, they had been some 30-some hours without food or water. Now, Anahita is originally from Iran, and she compared the treatment that she got from the Icelandic police to how the police in Iran might behave. And despite looking at a fine of some 500,000 ISK, which, by the way, is about 5 times the fine that you might get for driving under the influence, she has vowed that they will continue to do whatever they can to stop whale hunting in Iceland. Now, I am not a lawyer, but another lawyer who spoke to the press about this matter believes that the police may have put the government on the hook for paying damages to their protesters because of the police treatment of them. And again, I am not a lawyer, but I am a reporter who has covered police treatment of protesters for many years, and I am personally not very optimistic that these protesters will get any sort of damages paid out to them. Why? Because of a little thing we call Article 19 of the Law on Police. So this law is pretty simple. If the police give you an order, you must obey it. If you do not, you will be arrested and charged with disobeying a police order. Importantly, this law makes no stipulations as to whether or not an order is lawful. It does not matter if you were fully within your rights to be doing whatever it was that you were doing, and the cop had no right to tell you to stop doing whatever it was that you were doing. If a cop gives you an order and you say no, that in itself is a crime. And I have seen people fight Article 19 in court. Judges typically will just look at 2 questions. Number 1, did the police give a clear order that could be understood by the person they are giving the order to? And number 2, was this order obeyed or not? Furthermore, prosecutors are very tight-fisted about evidence. The whole concept of discovery is a bit lopsided in the Icelandic judiciary system. Furthermore, court cases cost money. And even if you are able to successfully petition for an appeal, and even if you win your appeal, and even if part of winning your appeal includes having your legal costs paid for, you still need to pay in the first place, and it can cost a lot of money that a lot of people don't have. So that is the legal framework within which the police operate. They have sweeping discretionary powers, and the courts tend to favor those discretionary powers, and appeals are expensive. So I'd be lying if I said that I'm optimistic that they'll get any damages paid to them. But frankly, I applaud their courage. And while they and the weather have made it impossible now for this company to be able to meet their fin whaling quota, 3 fin whales have been killed so far this season. In other news, the director of Hagar, a corporation which, amongst other things, owns the supermarket chains Hagkaup and Bonus, took gaslighting to a whole new level by opining in a recent interview that food prices in Iceland are not as high as they feel. He did, in fact, use that verb to describe how we interpret food prices in Iceland, that they feel expensive. I guess in the same way that one can feel hungry, or feel poor, or feel like you don't have enough money left over after paying rent and food to do anything else unless there's a 2-for-1 special at the cinemas. Anyway, he used some pretty tortured logic to arrive at his conclusions, talking about comparative household incomes and operational costs and utilities and such. So an expert from the Icelandic Confederation of Labor Unions had to come forward and point out, dude, we have the 3rd highest food prices in the world, mostly due to a lack of competition when it comes to the importing, wholesaling, and retailing of food. I wonder why the CEO of a major corporation that handles Iceland's food would just overlook this point. 4 people have reportedly been fined for off-road driving in Iceland this past year, and I wanted to take this opportunity to address this. Please do not engage in off-road driving in Iceland. I know those black sand plains and black sand beaches look very tempting, but there's a couple big reasons why you shouldn't do off-road driving. Number 1, it can be very dangerous. And if you get stuck in the stand, it's difficult for emergency workers to be able to get to you, to extract you from whatever you've gotten yourself into. Secondly, you may end up ripping up some of our mosses in the process. Well, what's the big deal about that? Well, some of these mosses can take decades to grow, and they're very essential for turning lava into soil and also for our ecosystems. And in fact, you can get in trouble just for walking on these mosses, let alone driving over them. So yes, when in Iceland, and if you rent a vehicle, please just, stay on the roads. Iceland is having its 2nd record year in a row for gonorrhea cases. There have so far this year been 213 reported cases of gonorrhea compared to 158 the entirety of last year, which was itself a record year. And while there have reportedly been similar trends in the rest of Europe, as someone who's lived in this country for a while, the dirty little secret that we don't like to talk about is that if there are other forms of birth control in play, condoms are typically forsaken. For real, it's a big problem. I mean, there's a reason why chlamydia is sometimes referred to as the Reykjavik handshake. And while chlamydia and gonorrhea can be cured easily enough, other STDs cannot. So yeah, wrap it up, folks. And finally, on the Reykjavik news desk, during remodeling construction at the secondary school MR, a cheat sheet was found in the paneling of one of the classrooms. Now, the cheat sheet was written on stationery that came from a company that was in operation from 1957 to 1989, and both the font of the stationery and the handwriting itself are pretty old-timey. It's believed that this cheat sheet was for a history test as well because of all the dates written on it. And the rector of the school has posted photos of this cheat sheet on Facebook and has asked the author, if you will, of the cheat sheet to come forward. And why would you? Can you imagine how embarrassing it would be to get detention when you're 60 years old? And that's all I have for you today on the Reykjavik News Desk. Be sure and like and subscribe. And in case you were not aware, my next Ask Me Anything session will be on September 16th at 1600 GMT. That's 12 noon Eastern Standard Time for you Americans. And this is a chance for patrons to be able to join me on a video call. You can ask me all kinds of questions about mostly anything, but for the most part, it's just a chance for all of us to hang out and just have a laugh and have a good time. Also, let me just double check the date. On September 25th, I will also be dropping my next single topic video, which is about my time in Icelandic politics. Now, this video was determined by a viewer poll also on my Patreon, wherein patrons vote for various topics, and this was the winner of the last viewer poll. So look forward to that on September 25th. The Ask Me Anything sessions and the viewer poll and much more are things you can get by signing up for my Patreon, which is linked in the description below. Which reminds me, I want to thank Corinne Vasquez, Marianne Ward, Christopher Hunter, Marianne Moores, Kimberly McDaniel, Iceman98, Octavia Hrund Jonsdottir, and Alan Valgame for being patrons on the $20 level, Ian Kingsley and Laura Johnson for being patrons on the $15 level, and Biathlon Alaska, Melissa Pfeffer, Christine Trowbridge, Hafstein Himminyomi Reginason, Stephen Ellis, and Vivi Carvalho Schaffner for being patrons on the $10 level. You folks rock. That's all for me at the Reykjavik News Desk. Be good to each other.